Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul O'Neill on behalf of Kingston's Buried Treasures. We'd like to welcome you again to our 11th installment of our lecture series. And the subject tonight is Samuel Decker Coykendall. And we kind of mixed it up. We ordinarily do this at the Senate House Museum, but tonight we're doing it here at Montrepose Cemetery. We're actually in the back of the Cornell Coykendall Memorial, and this is the burial place for Samuel Decker Coykendall, his family, as well as the family of Thomas Cornell. And I think you'd be very hard-pressed to find any two individuals who have been as important in the history of Kingston than these two gentlemen. In fact, Samuel Coykendall, he truly ruled Kingston with an iron fist. He controlled every industry. I don't think you could find any person who wasn't affected during his lifetime by Samuel Coykendall. Whether you worked for him, whether you worked for a company that depended on him, whether you bought products that he made or shipped, he controlled everything. He was an incredibly powerful person, an incredibly interesting person. So the subject, again, is Samuel Decker Coykendall, and our presenter tonight, we are again fortunate to have our beloved Kingston City historian, Ed Ford. So without further ado,
thank you, Paul. First question I have is, you might ask, if when you spell Coykendall, C-O-Y-K-E-N-D-A-L-L, why do you call it Coykendall? And the story, of course, is out of the genealogy of the Coykendall family, which I was able to get a hold of, and it's through long usage. You see, you got to remember that in the early records of this area and all over the country, when people were baptized, for example, they would just tell their name, and the person who wrote it down would just have to figure out how it was spelled. And so that happened with the Coykendall family a great deal. And so this one here, after about the second generation, changed the original from K-I-R-K-E-N-D-A-L-L to C-O-Y, but they didn't change the pronunciation. So we still were supposed to say Coykendall. And so that's how that came about. The first Coykendall in this country was Jacob Loersen van Coykendall, and he was the first in America in 1646. And he came to New Amsterdam, and I guess he had a wife and a son. The son was born in New Amsterdam, and his name was Lur, L-U-U-R. You know, I'll probably not have any more children, but L-U-U-R would be a distinctive name to have, because nobody else will have it. So at any rate, if any of you want to use it at all, and your families, you're welcome to have it. So what I've got information from besides the genealogy is that they pointed out to me that the church registries of the Old Dutch Church, in which Lur Coykendall is named, are about the oldest church records in America that are intact. And that's true with the Old Dutch Church. The records from 1660 up to the present day are all in the records, and of all the early ones translated, of course. And when what translation was done in 1891, it was done by Chaplain Hoes, H-O-E-S, who did a great big thick book. It's about 3 inches thick, thousands of names in there, and translated it. But what's important is that it was paid for thousands of dollars to be printed by Samuel Decker Coykendall. So he did that. Now, whether he was told that his family was early on in there or not, I have no idea, but at any rate, he did do that, and it was a wonderful thing. But so Samuel Coykendall was born in 1837, and the Coykendalls that were here, his Lur Coykendall was Lower Kirkendall and his family didn't, even though they were registered in the Old Dutch Church, they didn't live here. They lived out in Accord, a town of Rochester, at a site that I have no idea where. And they either came to Kingston for their children to be baptized, and there were 7 of them, or else they minister used to ride on horseback around a circuit and baptize people as he came to them, so they did, if they couldn't come in. So all of those 7 were all came from this area, and then in let's see, it was in 1700 about, they moved to, the family moved to New Jersey, to just below Port Jervis in upper New Jersey, and that's where this Coykendall Samuel's family lived. And Samuel was born in 1837 in a place called Wantage, or Wantage, however you say it, in New Jersey. And he grew up there, and he went to, where he went to school I have the slightest idea, but he appeared to be a very well-educated man. And he got a job early on in a dry goods store in Port Jervis, which was nearby. And then Samuel Coykendall moved from there to Newburgh, where he worked for another dry goods store. And he did such a good job that he was suggested for a branch store in Kingston, in Rondout. And so Samuel Coykendall came to this area probably about, I would say, about at least by 1859 anyway. And he started working in the store, and of course he probably met Thomas Cornell, who owned a lot of steamers on the river and towboats, and he had started to buy a lot of property. He was already talking about the ferry that he wanted to buy from Rhinecliff to Kingston. And so Samuel Coykendall started working in that store, and the Civil War came along in 1861, and the troops from here were sent to down the river. There were the 156 Regiment, and they were loaded onto the Manhattan steamer and sent down the river to go to Civil War. And Samuel Coykendall was the purser. And a purser, of course, was like a quartermaster, or whatever you'd call him, was an organizer. And that's what Samuel Coykendall seemed to be very astute in, organizing companies or firms, or in this case, he was a purser on the ship and organized that. So that was quite a step up for him. Then so he came back and they went up and down the river a couple times with the troops, because the first troops that went were only to be there for 3 months, and then they came back, and then they were off again later for another term. And so they said it was quite a going away thing. They started at the Academy Green down here in Kingston, and then they marched down to the Rondout. They got on this ship, the Manhattan, and had a barge attached to it, because there were so many of them they could all fit on the Manhattan. And as they went down the river, they were greeted by people at Poughkeepsie and Newburgh, and the cadets at West Point, and all like they were going to a party, or they were going to war. But anyway, that's what happened, and Coykendall was part of that right away. Now then he, well, I want to tell you one other thing that I think is pretty good. And the early records of the Coykendalls talk about the time they had early on with trying to get a small patch of land and cut down the trees, build a log cabin, and grow crops and all that, and killed animals that were around, like that they didn't, like bear or fox or wolves or deer or whatever. And so the story is that the farmer was out in the field one day, and in this cabin was his wife, and a man came and knocked on the door, and she invited him in, and he was a preacher, and he said to her after they talked a little bit, are there any Presbyterians around here? And she said, thought a minute, and she said, well, I don't know. She said, but my husband kills a lot of varmints. And she said, and if you look on the outside of our cabin wall, you might find the skins of one of those out there. So, so that's what happened in that time. I thought I couldn't miss that one. Whether it was a Coykendall or not, I have no idea. So Coykendall went off to war in the regiment. I guess it was the one that was 156 anyway. And he immediately attracted attention for his organizing abilities, and he was put on the staff of a general, Nathaniel Banks, to reorganize the commissary. Excuse me. Which he did. And he did it so well that they gave him a praise for unselfish and heroic devotion to duty. Well, I've been in the commissary in World War II, and I didn't think it was heroic to go in there, but apparently it seemed to, and so he did that for the rest of the war, and he was mustered out in 1865. Then he came back to Kingston. Apparently, before he left, he had met Thomas Cornell's daughter, Mary Augusta, and she was only 17 at the time before he went off to war, but she was a little older by the time he got back, and they were married in November of 1865, only a little while after he got back. Now, about 1850-something, see if I got that. Yeah, 1854, Cornell had bought the property on Wirt Street, that's Wirt Street, Spring Street, Post Street, what's now Cornell Park, and from the D&H Canal, who owned it, and he built a house on that property. Now, and he had previously lived in a house on President's Hill, which is off Spring Street, if you don't know where that is, behind the Trinity Lutheran Church, I guess. And so I think, and I don't know where Samuel lived when he was here early on in Kingston. I have no idea. But when Cornell built his house on Wirt Street and moved over to there from President's Place, then Samuel and his wife Mary Augusta moved into the place on the house on President's Place. And so they started to have children, and they finally ended up with 7 altogether. And the first one about 18, I don't know, 6, I'll get to that later, I guess. Those children grew up mostly on President's Place, and some of them at least went to the Ulster Academy, which is around the corner, and some of the rest of them I have no idea, and it doesn't say in their obituary, they don't bother with that, but all of them seem to have gone to Columbia University. Some of them graduated, and what I can tell you about them later, and some didn't. But now Coykendall, his first big deal was bought real estate in 1966, he spent $11,000 on a real estate buy, and then a year later, he came up with another $28,000 for another plot, and I think it was down in lower Roundout that Thomas Cornell pretty much owned, and I think maybe he learned a little lesson there, that they were going to do individual real estate purchases and not together, and they were not going to encroach on each other. So, and I think what they seem to have done all through the years, because I have several books of theirs, of their records that are in the county clerk's office, of course, of real estate records, but they also, they tell you what they bought and what they sold and where it was, and both of them seem to do a lot of quit claim buying property and then selling it off, and that's what raised an awful lot of money for them in the beginning. Now, Thomas Cornell, of course, had been in the towing business since shortly after the Delaware and Hudson Canal started, towing barges and coal boats and everything went to New York and other commodities. And so then he formed a company called the Thomas Cornell Company, and Thomas Cornell, of course, was the president of it, and Samuel Coykendall was a director of it, and that was how they went along for a while. But at least that gave Samuel an idea of business and what was going on and what could be progressed and so forth. So they continued to buy real estate and they started out to build a railroad, the Roundout and Oswego Railroad, which went up through Kingston and later was called the Ulster and Delaware. Now that railroad crossed 22 streets, winding back and forth up the hill to get to uptown Kingston and then on up through by Route 28 and up through the Catskills. And but the two of them were interested in railroads, and Thomas Cornell particularly. He even bought a railroad or started a railroad over in Dutchess County. And the reason he did that is when the east shore of the Hudson railroad was built around the early 1850s, and it got about as far as Poughkeepsie, and they knew that it was going to go all the way up to Troy, and Thomas Cornell wanted to make sure that it was going to be beneficial to him, and so he bought a railroad over on the Dutchess County, the Rhinebeck and let's see what that one. Oh yeah, Rhinebeck and Connecticut Railroad in 1870. And then in 1872 he started with others the Walkill Valley Railroad, which later came into Kingston on Greenkill Avenue, and that was sold to the West Shore later. And with the money that Samuel and Thomas Cornell got, I guess that was mostly Cornell, he built a grand hotel up in the Catskills. So they got into the hotel business as well. So what I found interesting was that in 1881, Thomas Cornell and Samuel built the Stony Clove and Catskill Mountain Railroad north from Phoenicia to the Laurel House and the Hotel Catterskill near Hunter. Now, I think that's near Devil's Tombstone. I don't know if you've ever been up at Stony Clove, and you go up from Phoenicia to Shandaken, Chichester, and you go up into the mountains. There's a clove there between two mountains. Well, the railroad went up there, and the reason I know that is about 1934, when I was young, 16 maybe. A few of us, friends of mine that were in the Scouts with me, Troop 12, we decided for Easter vacation to go up to Devil's Tombstone, like a little park there, and spend a few days. So we went up there. Well, we didn't want to put our tent right near the road for the noise, and we knew the railroad was on the back part of that, and so we put it 100 feet away from there. And I kind of forgot about that, but we were there a couple of nights, and all of a sudden, 3 o'clock in the morning, I hear this chugging of this train coming up the valley, and it was going like the steam and the smoke and everything is pouring out of this thing and making a racket. And they came about 100 feet. I thought they were going to run over me. It was terrible. And then to add, you know how railroad people are, to add insult to injury, as the track went up a little further, it had to cross the road to go to the left of that lake that's up there. And darn if they didn't blow that whistle. 3 o'clock in the morning, who's going to be on the road? I mean, maybe horse and wagons in 1930? But anyway, that was the Clove Railroad, the Stony Clove Railroad. So they continued together to get into a lot of industries, the towing, and later on they, let's see, I got some here about I'll tell you about the trolley cars next. 1865, there was a horse railroad started, and a horse railroad is a trolley car pulled by a horse. And when they went down in the roundabout, up and down that hill, they had 2 horses on it. And when they're up on the flat part, the rest of uptown, they had 1 horse. And of course, that's when they built the livery stable on East Chester Street, so they could change horses when they had come up the hill from the roundabout and were tired out, and put another horse on for the rest of the way. And so at any rate, they bought that. Thomas Cornell started in 1865, the horse railroad, and so that he was the president, of course, and then he bought the right-of-way of the Union Plank Road, which is Route 28, and also Broadway, up and down Broadway to the Strand, and so he had that, and so then well, there was some kind of trouble, but that doesn't matter. In 1892, the Kingston City Electric, they decided to change from horse cars to electric trolley cars, and that's when they started, 1892. So, of course, by this time, Thomas Cornell had died. He died in 1890. In 1892, when this trolley cars came, it was all Samuel Coykendall. And so they decided that they were going to put a trolley car all the way from downtown to uptown, and they needed to go they needed to go across the West Shore Railroad track, which was started in 1883, and that was all right because the horse cars had already been going across that direction, and they had the right of way. They already had permission. But then another trolley car company tried to organize to go on Hasbrook Avenue and up, and so they wanted to also cross the railroad tracks, and they said, well, no, you can't. You can't get permission. And they was in litigation for 7 years. Well, they tried to work it out, and the Colonial City finally built a tunnel under the West Shore, right near the old railroad station, from Thomas Street over to Diedrich Street. It was a tunnel with railroad tracks on it for a trolley tracks, and it was about 13 feet wide and about 18 feet deep, and it looked like a New York subway because they put tiled or bricks, painted them white on the side, like the old subways used to do, and so they had this. They had the tunnel going for their trolley only for a little bit, and then apparently Coykendall, who had given him permission to buy land from the Thomas Cornell estate, he let him do that. But I think he secretly knew what was going to happen, because only the next year, in 1891, let's see, 90, yeah, anyway, the next year or two, some syndicate from New York City of a lot of wealthy people bought up not only the Kingston City Railroad track, but also the Colonial City. And so then they both used the tunnel. And I remember riding through that tunnel. I think it was there till about 1937 or something when the buses started. And so I remember riding. You could go down, nice ride down through the tunnel. And he said that one of the only problems they had was that the trolley could stop down at the bottom of the hill to get any people from the train passengers that would want to come down. And so when they stopped down the bottom of the hill, they found that the kids had greased the tracks. So the trolley couldn't make it up the other side until he got somebody there with a lot of sand or something to get them started again. But other than that, they didn't have too much trouble. I had one other story I forgot about the horse car. The horse car apparently went as far as on John Street as down to Green Street, and that was the end of the line. So it was one horse on the front of the trolley, and it was not a two-way trolley like the electric ones later. It just went one way. So when they got down to the corner of John and Green Street, there was a turntable there, and so the driver would drive the horse across, and the trolley would be on top of the turntable. So he had to get off, unhook the horse, and tie him up to a post nearby. Then he had to turn the turntable around to turn the trolley car around, which was not too hard. And then he had to hitch up the horse back again to start. So that was fine, but the kids around the neighborhood figured that was a lot of fun. And so they all would come when they knew the trolley was coming. When the man was busy with his horse, they were pushing it around and making a merry-go-round out of it. And that's so the reason the notice was in the paper was that they were warned that it was a very dangerous thing to do and that they should not do that, absolutely. So whether that worked or not, I have no idea. So anyway, that's the story of the trolley, and that was that part of it. I only have 14 pages, so I hope you brought your pajamas. Now, Paul is told to stop me no matter what at 6:30. The next thing that they bought was the Rhinebeck and Kingston Ferry Company. See, in the 1950s, Thomas Cornell was already involved with that, and he had bought the rights. So Thomas Cornell was the president of the new ferry company, and Samuel was the secretary. It was worth about $80,000, and they had 5 directors, and they were the only stockholders, and each owned 1 share, but Thomas Cornell had 796. So he took care of himself very well. The ferry slip used to be at Kingston Point, and that was all right early on when they had very small ferry boats, and so that was shorter across the river. But then in 1853 they decided they should move it to a ferry slip at nearby Hasbrook Avenue. And when Thomas Cornell died in 1890, the ferry company split from the Cornell Steamboat Company, which sounds like it wouldn't make any difference because it was a separate ferry company. The only trouble was that the ferry company, in the wintertime, when they wanted to go through when there was some ice in the river, they had to get Cornell to get the ice out of the river, and they charged them more money than they even had. So that didn't work out either. So eventually these things, they all kind of merged together, all into Thomas Cornell's hands. And that same thing happened to the ferry company. Of course, you know that went until 1944, and then the New York State Bridge Authority decided to run it, and they did it for about 10 years, and then the Rhinecliff Bridge was opened up. And so that was the end of the ferry line there. Now, some odds and ends of things they did. They just, for example, in 1897, Samuel Coykendall and his wife Mary Augusta, bought and built Kingston Point Park, and down by the Hudson River, and it was an amusement park. It was all full of different concessions, like a penny arcade, a merry-go-round, a Ferris wheel, a shooting gallery, everything you could name. It had a beach there, and it had rowboats, canals, and canoes. It had everything there, and so they did that, and it was all landscaped, and I think by Calvert Vaux, and all landscaped beautifully. And the trolley car, of course, came down and went to the down Delaware Avenue and came down into the park that way. But also, what Cornell built it for was that prior to that, there was not a big enough dock for the dayliner steamers with 5,000 people on them, and they were landing over in Rhinebeck or Poughkeepsie. And so he wanted them to land in Kingston. So he built a pier out on the end of Kingston Point, and had a railroad track coming all around on a trestle to the pier, and he would bring the trains around there. The day line would come in, the people would get off the day line, go across the platform and onto a train, and go up in the mountains by the Ulster and Delaware Railroad. So that lasted quite some time, and what of course killed that was the automobile, and the fact that it was so easy for people to go places when with cars than it was prior to that time. So that was they did that in 1897, and the Kingston Point Park amusement park lasted for quite some time until it just kind of phased out. He finally sold it to the trolley company, and they took care of the concessions, but that was the end of that. Then in 1899, Samuel decided to buy up all the cement companies. So he bought the Elisha Brigham Hudson River Cement Company for $20,000, 65 acres on the Hudson River. You could buy a car for less, about that. In 1899, he bought the Lawrence Cement Company in the town of Rosendale for 7 acres for $3,000, with all the equipment and everything, because cement was phasing out. The Rosendale cement that we were noted for here didn't dry fast enough for contractors, and the Portland cement came along, which is quicker drying capacity, and superseded it. In 1900, they bought the Rosendale Cement Company, and that was 57 acres for $15,000. And so he always, every one of these deals, he always seemed to look ahead and see what was happening and make out pretty well. In 1908, Samuel did a nice thing. The George Clinton commemoration, when George Clinton's body was brought back from Washington, D.C. to be buried in the old Dutch churchyard. When George Clinton's body was coming through, going to be taken through New Jersey, it was Coykendall that arranged with the railroads to have a railroad car specially brought across there for him to be on. Then when he got to New York City and onto boats, most of the boats that went up the river with George Clinton's body were Cornell boats, and so that they took part in everything, and he was very generous in that respect. Then in 1910, they bought all the ice houses that were available, and because refrigeration had come into play, and so what he got out of that, I'm not sure, because it was too late. But prior to that time, there would be, in the earlier times, before refrigeration, there were as many as 50 barges full of ice taken down in a week, taken to New York City for refrigeration. It was incredible. In fact, 1911, the Cornell Steamboat Company owned 57 tugboats. So in his lifetime, Thomas Cornell owned about 200 boats altogether on the river. And of course, Coykendall took over, and they kind of went little by little as these industries faded away. And then in 1910, the Consolidated Rosendale Cement Company, they took 150 acres and they developed into the Greenkill Park. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard of Greenkill Park. It's down in Rondout, and it's, pardon me, and a very nice, beautiful area down there. And they had cottages, and they had a big house and everything there. And at one time, and I can remember this, the famous boxer trained there, Max Schmeling, was, know that, huh? He trained there. I don't know what year that was, do you know? No, I don't know, in the 30s anyway. And then later on, Father Divine bought that property, and he had people there, and some of them were burned down, unfortunately, just by accident almost. So 1920s, there was a decline of the Cornell Steamboat Company. Cement was disappearing. The bluestone industry was gone. He bought that up too. He had the Hudson River Bluestone Company. Coal was taken by railroad instead of by canal. Ice went out. Hay, they were carrying hay to New York City, and they figured, well, why would there so much hay? It was during Prohibition, and they were hiding Canadian whiskey underneath the hay. And so now I'm going to get to Samuel Coykendall himself. When he died, which was January 13th, 1913, 100 years ago in January. Now, I tried to talk Paul into coming down here in January and doing this. And he's a lawyer, and I take his advice very strongly, and he told me no. Told me no.
Bring down 3 chairs.
So anyway, when he died, he was the owner and the president of the Cornell Steamboat Company. He was the owner and president of the Ulster and Delaware Railroad, president of the First National Bank of Rondout, a trustee of the Rondout Savings Bank, a trustee of the Rhinebeck and Kingston Ferry Company, owned the Consolidated Rosendale Cement Company. He owned the Hudson River Bluestone Company, the Grand Hotel, and a Grant House at Catskill. And he was a member of everything you ever heard of. He was a member of the Union League Club, the Metropolitan Club, the Republican Engineers Club in New York City, Chamber of Commerce, New York City, Kingston Club, governor of the 12th Skill Club, member of the Holland Society, the Society of the Sons of the Revolution, St. Nicholas Society, the New York Genealogical Society, American Historic and Scenic Preservation Society, Museum of Natural History, and a fellow in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, trustee of Vassar College, trustee of the Kingston City Hospital, the Kingston City Library, the Old Senate House Association, a member of the Chamber of Commerce here, and a contributor to the George Clinton reburial, and the Old Dutch Church records. Now, I don't think I told you about those. In 1891, whether it was the genealogist for this Coykendall genealogy, whether he came here and talked to Samuel Coykendall, I don't know. But as I say, he had that great big book of all those records, and Coykendall paid for the whole thing, thousands of dollars. Mary Augusta Cornell Coykendall was born in 1842, died in 1865, married in 1865. She was born in Rondout, daughter of Thomas Cornell and Catherine Ann Woodmansee. She was, at her death, she was a supporter of the Wirt Street Baptist Church, the Industrial Home in Kingston, the City Hospital. She was and they said in their obituary, she was a woman of strong religious convictions, yet had a broad sympathy for all denominations. Dean Hickey of St. Mary's Church said her influence radiated to every place where good could be done. And she died in 1919. I think that's pretty good. It must have been a very wonderful lady. Now these are the kids. First one, Thomas C. Coykendall, born in 1866. Now when he went to Columbia University and became a civil engineer. He was a mechanical genius, and he was appointed to by his father, I'm sure, to be a chief engineer of the chief engineer of the Cornell Steamboat Company. And then later on he became a vice president. I got all these dates and everything, but I did that because I couldn't tell what they did or for how long. But they held these posts for years and years, and apparently how much work they did, I have no idea. Ulster and Delaware Railroad, he was the chief engineer for a number of years, and then a vice president. He was vice president of the Roundout Savings Bank, the First National Bank of Roundout, and the Kingston Ferry Company. So he and his brother Edwin, which I'm coming to, didn't always get along. And although they had these posts like president of the company, if Edward was finally got to be the executor of Cornell and Coykendall's estate, of Samuel. And so when Thomas wanted to do something, like he wanted to change the tugboats from wooden hulls to steel hulls, and he wanted to have diesel engines instead of coal-fired. If it was too much money, Thomas said, yes, we ought to do it, and Edward says, no, we're not going to do it. That's all. He wouldn't give him the money. So they didn't always get along, didn't always see eye to eye. Now Harry was the next one, Harry Coykendall, 1868. He attended Columbia University but didn't graduate. He was a treasurer of the Ulster and Delaware Railroad for about 18 years, and Cornell Steamboat Company treasurer for a few. But he wasn't around here very much. He liked it in New York City, and he didn't get involved in all these things. Maybe these jobs that he had, he was just getting paid for, but I don't think he was around. But well, he did something in in 1913, February, he married Louisa Brega, who was an actress with the stage name of Hope Latham, and on the Broadway stage, and he brought her back up to West Chestnut Street. Well, a showgirl on West Chestnut Street with Mama Coykendall there? No way. And so they never accepted her at all. And so unfortunately, of course, for him, he died in 1914, so they were only married about a year. And there was such a stipulation in the will that she received no money. The will stated that no child who died before the mother would have inherited anything. So she didn't get a penny and returned to the Broadway stage. So that was all printed in the New York Sun. So they made a big deal out of the whole story. Edward, 1871, he graduated from Columbia University as a civil engineer. And he was a general superintendent of the Ulster and Delaware Railroad at first, and then the president later for 20 years. Then the Kingston Ferry Company, he was the president for 10 years. First National Bank for 12 years. He was around here. He lived on 156 West Chestnut Street, a house that's still there. I don't know what near you say what it's near, but it has if you know West Chestnut Street, apartments all surrounding it. In that house, his house is right in the middle, and he was executor of the estate, I said, of Cornell and Coykendall. He was the director of the Steamboat Company, and he had something to do with the when the reservoir was built in the early 1900, that the railroad track had to be changed to moved away from where the reservoir was. And so he did that. He arranged all that. He was a member of the board of managers of the Kingston Hospital during construction when they're building the new hospital. He was a trustee of the State Teachers College in New Paltz. He was the trustee of the Senate House Association. He brought John Vanderlin's paintings in his will, and he bequeathed all the art and documents with the provision that they shall never be moved elsewhere. And they're there, and the Ariadne and some of those others there, I have a list of them here, were the ones that he provided and put there in the Senate House. He also was a trustee of this cemetery and president of it, and I have no idea whether he had something to do with this pergola or not, because I don't know exact date of when it was put here. But I know that Cornell and Coykendall owned the land, but who built this and where the money came from, I'm sure it was out of one of their funds anyway, of course. But he also helped the 12 Skill Golf Club by giving them a lease on land for the golf course. And his wife was Isabel Hutton, who predeceased him, but she had beautiful gardens in her house at 156 West Chestnut Street. And I think at New Paltz there's a science building named for him. Yes, I got this here. The collection of the Vanderlyn paintings of the Ariadne on panel, the George Washington, Martha Washington, Mr. Ditmas, Mrs. Ditmas, young woman, French woman, a view of Kingston from Delaware Avenue, all in oil on canvas, 3 watercolors, French mother and child, Roman arch, triumph. There's also a pencil sketch of a tree that's considered magnificent. Vanderlyn art lent to the museum by Mr. Coykendall, which now becomes a part of the gift, includes a miniature Vanderlyn self-portrait on ivory. So I don't know, they have a great value, and I don't know. Do you even know how much they're valued at? I don't think we want to know. All right, we don't want to know. Frederick Coykendall was next. He attended Ulster Academy, so I knew that he did go in there, and graduated from Columbia University, Phi Beta Kappa, honorary degrees in civil engineering. He was a Cornell Steamboat Company secretary at first, and then the president for, oh God, it looks like 44 years. Kingston Ferry Company for about 10 years. Chairman of the Columbia University Board of Trustees for from 1932 to 54, 20-some years, 21. President of the Columbia University Press. He gave Columbia most of 6,000 volumes of poetry, early periodicals, 17th and 18th century romances. He was active in the New York State Chamber of Commerce, the New York Board of Trade, trustee of New York Historical Society. He died in 1954, and he left a wife, Mary Beach Warren, had a daughter, Ursula, wife of Frank Walker. And he was supposed to get another award, but he passed on before that was awarded to him. So that's Frederick. I'm almost out of children. Where they were. Get this open. This one's short. Catherine Cornell, 1874. All I know is she married Edward Herzog, and she got a regular stipend from the Cornell estate year after year. Some people tried to contact her in early years here. I remember in the 60s, tried to call, well, she died in 48, but her family to get information on the Coykendalls to no avail. So I didn't know what happened. Don't know what happened. I don't know what she did or where she went to school or anything about it. Frank Coykendall was next. He was when he went to Columbia, was a civil engineer. He was a vice president of the Hudson River Bluestone Company, and then a president later for 10 years. Cornell Steamboat Company treasurer, 30-some years, vice president, and 10 years. Ulster and Delaware Railroad for about 16 years. Kingston Ferry Company for another 20, 30. First National Bank vice president. So they all got money for all these jobs and everything, and I'm sure they did very well. He was many years president of the Kingston City Library, what I didn't know, active in the Red Cross, president of the Twofskill Golf Club, and he retired and he lived in the Union League Club in New York City for many years and died in Croton-on-Hudson, in some place called Skyview Haven, which I don't know what that was, but anyway, that was that. Robert, the last one, he was a student early on, of course, and attended Columbia, but didn't graduate. And he was treasurer of the Hudson River Bluestone Company for 5 years. But he removed to New York City in 1911, and he didn't live very long. I have no more record of him. So anyway, that is the end of the Cornells, and I would say that they I don't know any family that had more influence on this whole area than certainly Thomas Cornell and particularly Samuel Coykendall. Now, what kind of people they were personally, I don't know. They said they had taught their children not to be pampered, that because they had money, and not to lord it over anybody else. And so I have no idea how friendly or how good they were to people, but I hope they were. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed. Ed, that was wonderful. Do we have any questions? Yes, Jillian? So the question is, when Samuel Coykendall's daughter married the Herzogs, whose graves are actually right here, are they related to the Herzogs from Herzogs in Kingston and the Kingston Plaza?
Not that I know of. I don't think so. I don't think so, but I'm not sure. Maybe they can tell us.
It's not a common name.
Well, no, that's true. But I didn't think Robert Herzog was from here.
The question is, when they were putting in the Walgreens, which is at the bottom of West Chestnut Street, right? I guess it's East Chestnut Street. Was that they found a turnaround? Was that?
They found it.
They did. They found it.
For the trolley.
That's right. That turntable was inside the trolley barn, and it was for the trolleys to drive in, and then they could be turned to go here, 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 whatever, different bays, so they could be stored. And the turntable was there. And I watched that very carefully when they tore that building down, because I said that if you have any remains of that turntable, I want to know about it. So the man called me one day and he said, "You better come down." And I went down and I got about a 6-foot long curved rail underneath there. It was part of the turntable, and I took it down and gave it to the Trolley Museum, and they have it there on exhibit someplace. So that was the only thing that was left out of that.
Why didn't they ever put the Trolley Museum there?
Did they what?
Why didn't they put
question-
the trolley museum there?
Well, because they tore it down for a drugstore, and they wouldn't hear anything different. So
I think the Trolley Museum, those tracks were going out to where it went to Kingston Point, and I think they wanted to keep that, and I think that's why they kept it down there. Ken? The question is, are there any living Coykendall relatives?
I don't believe so. Certainly not from this line. I think they're all gone. There is one family that I said it was Frank Warren's something. Warren is Warrin, and they had they had a daughter, and she was married, but I have not followed through at all. The rest of them, there were only two of them. Well, some of them weren't even married anyway, and so there were. I figured there were none. That there were no grandchildren whatsoever, but I was wrong about that. There was one line, and that's it. But the money went. You want to know where the money went? They put it all into a legacy account, and they just wrote checks day after day and week after week till the money was gone. And now what they willed to anybody, I don't know. I'd have to go look up all the wills and see if they gave anything to any worthwhile cause. But other than that, they lived pretty high. They lived in New York City. They lived in some club or something. It was an expensive place. But yeah, the money just went. I've got a ledger that I've seen that says legacy account, and that's what they were all entitled to. So much, yeah.
Ed, you mentioned Greenfield Village in the roundout. Where was that, do you know?
Well, you go out Route 213, I think it is, that goes out parallel, right alongside of the Roundout Creek, all along.
Where the marinas are
And you go, I don't know about how far from, well, what will I say, near Eddyville? Where's Mark? Mark, how do you get to Greenkill Park?
Would be Mountain Road on the one side and Creek Locks on the other. Was that entire section between the two?
What do you call that? Is that part of Eddyville?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
What happened to the house that was on Ward Street where Cornell Park is?
About 1942, I guess. It was vacant. The Rice family had lived there before that, and they were either gone, I think, and then it was empty, and unfortunately it was torn down. And I don't know who did it. I don't know who owned it. Maybe the Rice family owned it, didn't want it. But the same way with the Coykendall Mansion up on West Chestnut Street. You know, that went too. I mean, it was a bad time around World War II. I don't know what happened, but there was no Landmarks Commission, no historic districts, no nothing to talk about anything being preserved as a unit, or Friends of Historic Kingston didn't exist, and some of these things, not in the 40s. So there was very little to keep anybody from tearing anything down that they wanted to do, for whatever reason.
I think with the Cornell house, I believe that there was a fire in there as well that had damaged it, I believe. And then it was, yeah, Senator Rice would live there for many years. Beautiful, beautiful home. The stairs are still there, you can see, and I had been told that there's a beautiful piece of bluestone, colored bluestone, that's right at the front step. But it's a shame, and the Coykendall house was absolutely beautiful. Edward Coykendall's house is still there. As Ed said, there's an apartment complex on both sides, and if you look straight back, it's a beautiful house. Samuel Coykendall's stables are still there. They're the playhouse now.
You're ahead of me.
And you weren't sure about in New Falls, the college, there is a science building, big science building.
Oh, good.
Coykendall Science Building.
Well, that's
Good. Well, I hope that he made a generous contribution for that. He probably did.
It's where the planetarium is. I bring my daughter there, and I believe it is. I believe Edward Coykendall was the one who.
On the back of Edward's house, where the apartments surround the house, I know somebody that lived in an apartment there. The back porch of that house matches this pergola.
Oh.
When you told the farmer story, why did you pick on us pet
And that's Ed Ford's brother, by the way.
You're my little brother, and I'll see you when I get you home.
Yeah.
How many people can have a 90-year-old little brother? Not many.
And there's no doubt in my mind they will go back and fight tonight. Mark?
And you mentioned at the end that the ice business was declining, and they were out buying all the ice houses along the river.
Yes.
What was their long-term strategy? Was it just acquisition of property, or did they have a business?
I think only the property. If the ice business was shot, I can't see where he would get much gain at all. But it was a big thing on anything that was quit claim deed or something abandoned or whatever. They were real estate men, both of those, and that's the only thing I can think of. Well, he even bought the canal. He bought the D&H canal for $10,000, the whole thing, and immediately started to sell off pieces here, there, and all over. And so, you know, he just, he had the money, and he could afford to make money or lose it in some cases. Well, he probably didn't very often, but that's why.
It's amazing thing about him that almost everything he touched turned to gold. He's the antithesis of me, but it is amazing. Kingston Point Park became this huge thing, and he made it for a very specific purpose, but he made a fortune from Kingston Point Park. We have to remember, think of Kingston Point Park now, and think of at the turn of the century, about 1 million people a year came through Kingston Point Park. He controlled the trains. 26 trains a day left Kingston Point Park, going to the Catskill hotels, one of which he owned. He owned the The Grand Hotel was the one, and that was the biggest of the hotels. It was built by Thomas Cornell, but he took it over. So he controlled everything, and everything he did may have had unintended consequences that always made him richer. It's amazing. I can't, I can't get $1 back on a Powerball ticket if I buy 20. But Paul.
When they enlarged the sewer plant down on the Strand, they had a turntable down there also. Was that where the trolleys, the trains came from Kingston Point Park and turned around and went back out, or?
Yeah.
What was that turnaround?
Yeah, right by the trolley museum.
Yeah.
Yes. I'd say right in that general area. Yeah. I think so. All right. Okay.
Weird little thing, but Kingston Point Park had the first electric lights between New York City and Albany. And you came up the river, in the evening, it was dark, and here was this big puddle of bright light right by the river. It was awesome in those days.
If anyone didn't hear that, the statement was that Kingston Point Park. No, this is just for the camera. Can everybody hear me? I'm not using this microphone. Is for the camera, so it's not. I'm not mic'd up on that. Usually talk loud enough. People usually tell me to quiet down. But the statement was that Kingston Point Park was the first place that had electric lights between New York City and Albany, which is very. I mean, it's amazing. And one thing that is very interesting is that there's a website where you can compare wealth at different points in time to today. So I use that to determine what the net worth of Samuel Coykendall would be today, based upon the assets he had at the time he died in January of 1913. There's a number of ways that you can do it, but one, based on the economic power, the buying power of his assets, the comparative value to today would be $801 million. So these people, tax-free, absolutely. There wasn't an income tax. Thomas Cornell, who died 23 years earlier, his net worth was double Samuel Coykendall's. So when you think of these people, we're talking about billionaires. And they controlled everything. They controlled it at times ruthlessly. It's said that you could always go to Samuel Kuykendall's office. He had an office in the Cornell Steamboat Company offices it was on Ferry Street at the time. It was at the base of Broadway now. And you could always go there and you could see him. You just had to go to his office. You might have to wait a few minutes, but he would see everybody. Didn't mean he would agree with you or give you what you wanted, but he was available. But he was a very, very shrewd person. And when you look at what the assets, what he did and what he accomplished, it's kind of amazing that by the end of his son's lives, they had really destroyed all of it, and a lot of it was a sibling rivalry between Frederick and Edward. And our presenter here for the Thomas Cornell subject was Stuart Murray, who wrote the only book on Thomas Cornell that I'm aware of. And he had interviewed many of the people who worked very closely with the presidents and the board members of the the Cornell Steamboat Company. And I asked him, I said, do you think that the sibling rivalry was such a point that they were just, whatever they could do to oppose the other, they did to the detriment of the company? And he told me, he said, no, I don't believe that was the case. I think that they just didn't have the training. They didn't have the knowledge. Samuel Kuykendall was somebody who kept such control over everything. And I believe that he just didn't bring his kids in enough. He didn't train them enough because he could not let control of it. And when they finally got control, they were really unprepared to do it. When you look at Thomas Cornell and you look at Samuel Kuykendall, every decision they make is years ahead. They foresaw everything. Thomas Cornell, who owned the Cornell Steamboat Company, largest tugboat company on the Hudson River. He controlled the Hudson River. He saw that the railroads were the future. So while he controlled everything, he saw that this new thing that didn't really exist anywhere, he knew. He saw it, and he started investing in that. So these guys were so ahead, and everything that they did had an ulterior motive. They were 10 steps ahead of everybody else. His sons, unfortunately, were not. And it's a shame. If you went back to the turn of the century and you asked some of the people, almost everybody, again, was either employed or relied on one of their companies, that the Cornell Steamboat Company would be gone by the 60s. They would tell you there's no way. It was a monumental, it controlled almost everything, but they did. And it is amazing when you look at the fortune that these gentlemen had, that it was really squandered within a generation. I would have liked to have been part of that generation, but...
We want to do here, clean it.
Yes, this is, as you can see, this memorial was bright white. And Ed, besides for having to thank Ed for this presentation, this was Ed's idea. Ed said, Samuel Kuykendall, this is the 100th anniversary of his death. We should do something at the memorial. And he did want to do something in January. We just simply, it wasn't feasible. We would have had to do it somewhere else, but we wanted to do it here because this is a beautiful cemetery. Beautiful, beautiful cemetery. And this is the crown jewel of the cemetery. Thomas Chambers, the first settler of Kingston, is buried right as you come in. Around the corner is John McEntee, who, if you can find one person who is ultimately responsible for the Battle of Gettysburg being fought, it was John McEntee. It was the information he got while he was working under George Sharp for the Bureau of Military Information that ultimately led to Gettysburg. Am I correct with that, Walt? I don't want to overstep my bounds, but an incredibly important person, and I believe he's a brother of Jervis McEntee. He's buried right around the corner, so what we would like to do is bring this memorial back to the state it was. It is absolutely beautiful, and it really, time takes its toll on everybody. As you can see, there's some graffiti. Somebody loves Erica, but I think that's also a life lesson that no matter how powerful you are, how much money you have, you still may at some point be beholden to a couple of teenagers with a stolen bottle of liquor from their parents' liquor cabinet and a Sharpie pen. But we would like to bring this back. It really, these people were so important in our history, and they deserve to have it to have it back to the way it was.
Still on the floor.
There,
It
there,
used to be a beautiful
yep, there's a mosaic here, and you can see if you come up, and I hope you do come and walk around after, that are made of different pieces of bluestone. A lot of them are coming up, but that was what Ed wanted to do. Ed wanted to have this down here. We had intended on having something before and cleaning it up a lot more. We, unfortunately, time crept up on us, so we weren't able to do it, but we still want to do it.
100th birthday.
For Ed's 100th birthday, everybody meet here. So Ed, thank you very much. And before everyone leaves, I would like to first, Jillian? You're way ahead of us. What really happened was Bill Reynolds, who is the caretaker here, mowed and weed whacked and did a very good job on that. I came and picked up stuff and raked as I could. I wanted to actually note these people last, but since you bring it up, I will bring it up first, because there are some very special thanks that are due to a few people on this event. Again, first, this was Ed's idea, and Ed is our speaker, and Ed is but when Bob Rizzo, again, Bob always does a spectacular job. He's a true professional of doing the videos, but sound was a problem here. There's no electricity. Bob bought down and set up a battery-powered PA system so that we were able to have this, and came out and tested it out. Again, Bill Reynolds did a lot of the groundkeeping. He's a groundkeeper here, and we thank him for that. Bob Carey, who has done a lot of things on historical buildings, but Bob Carey came and cleaned off some of the tombstones for Thomas Cornell and some of his family. So you'll see all these tombstones were pretty black. The Thomas Cornell tombstone and his wife's are brighter. Walt Wachowski, I cannot thank him enough. Walt came, every time I came here, Walt was here. Walt came, and if you take a look, the Samuel Coykendall and his wife's Mary Cornell Coykendall's tombstones are back to the way they were. They were white, and they're there because Walt came here and scrubbed it. I saw him. I mean, I didn't even recognize him when I first saw him. Every time I came here, he was here raking, he was here doing something. So Walt, a very special thanks. This place would not look like it does today without Walt. And Tom and Jacob from the Senate House. The Senate House has been so wonderful. We always have our presentations there. This is the first one we have not. They keep the Senate House open for us so that we can have that. But today, they took all their chairs. They took them, they shipped them down here, and they put them all up. You know, we're not here. We didn't have chairs. They did this during the day, so we cannot thank both of them enough for everything they do, but particularly for today. And let me tell you, it was hot. It was very hot. So these people, a special thanks for them. This would not be here today. It would not be the way it is today without them. And I do also want to thank Montrepose Cemetery. They allowed us to have this here. Dennis Larios, I approached him. He's on the board, and the board, they said, yeah, you know what? That would be great. We would love to have you do that. Not many places would do that. I said, yeah, we're going to bring 60 to 80 people here, set up some chairs and a PA system. But they welcomed it, and Bill Reynolds was very helpful and really availed himself to us. All the people who publicize this event, who really make this what it is. Hugh Reynolds from the Kingston Times. Jillian Fisher's here. Many of you, I'm sure, get the emails from her about these. Friends of Historic Kingston always publicize this event, always puts it on their website. Ulster County Tourism, Kingston Community Radio, Kingston Happenings, and again, Walt Wachowski and the Civil War Roundtable. There you go. We have a member here that from Walt's Facebook, but he puts them up there. So all these people publicize this, and I'm sure a lot of people here are here because of that. I also want to thank Kingston's Buried Treasures. It takes a lot to put these on. Joe Tantillo Ordinarily, we have a PowerPoint presentation. Unfortunately, we were able to get the battery-powered PA system. I could not find a battery-powered TV for the life of me. So unfortunately, but he did put one together for this, and he creates the flyers and everything, all of our digital media. Ed Ford. I mean, what can you say about Ed? You can say a lot. You can say a lot. Ann Gordon, our Ulster County historian. Pat Murphy from Friends of Historic Kingston. Pat's here. Tom Huffey from City Council. He's there in the back. And Nina Poshypak. She's not here, but she's the Ulster County Clerk, and she's incredibly helpful. But the other people that we're talking about, I consider Tom and Jacob, Walt, they're part of Kingston's Buried Treasure. We would not be here without them. Again, all of you. You know, this started as a way to really bring recognition to people in Kingston's history that deserve it. All of you have kept this alive. And I know that all of you tell other people about these events and about these people, and that's what it's about. History is there to be shared, and there is not a place in the United States with the history of Kingston. There isn't. You know, we figured we'd start with a few of these. Every time we sit down, we go another year in advance. It's an amazing place, and it's important that we recognize these people. And people, you know, Ed, that was a wonderful presentation, and it was a great idea to have it here. Little difficult. I kept saying, I hope it doesn't rain, and Ed kept saying, it won't. It won't. It hasn't.
When you give me credit, don't forget to give Paul O'Neill some credit.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So we appreciate it. Thank you, Jack. And please, it's a beautiful night. Take a walk around. This is a beautiful cemetery. There's a lot of history here. And take a walk around here and see all of the Coykendall sons, the daughters, all of them are here in the Cornells as well. So again, thank you. Oh, I have to tell you our next events, I'm sorry. July 19th, we're going to be back at the Senate House Museum. Our own Hugh Reynolds will be doing the history of Kingston's press corps, the rough and tumble story of Kingston's newspapers. That's a title. That's a great title. Come on. So, I mean, if you think the Daily News and the Post are at each other, I'm telling you, you're not going to believe what it used to be like. And then our next event after that, August 16th, is on Kingston City Hall, the house that united Kingston. That is going to be done by Tom Huffey, who is our City of Kingston councilman. That is actually going to be at Kingston City Hall. And I don't know if you know, the reason why City Hall is located where it is, it was in the middle of Kingston and Roundout. They both wanted to become a city. Kingston won, and as a olive branch, the City Hall was placed in the middle, and it truly is the place that brought Kingston together. It's a beautiful building as well, and we will be having that there then. So hopefully we'll see you next month at the Senate House Museum for Hugh Reynolds' presentation on Kingston Press. Thank you, and everyone have a good weekend.